Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's podcast. Before I jump into the news, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody that showed up and participated in the live stream from Brooklyn Video Games. It was really awesome having Kevin bring down the Neo Geo dev team games and being able to try them on real hardware that's been calibrated and in great condition. The games were awesome. I really liked them all, but just being able to try them in that environment was as perfect as it could get. The only one that I'd tried before was Gunlord, and only the Dreamcast version, so this was pretty awesome. As always, Brooklyn Video Games was a great host, and they have two great streams going on. I sucked as a host this time, though. I was having so much fun hanging out in person that I didn't really jump in the chat. I'd planned on at least being on the chat on my phone, and I never sat with a headset to call commentary on any of the awesome games, but sorry about that. I'll make sure to do better next time, and it was really just a matter of we didn't do it then, I didn't know if we would ever have time to do it. My schedule is crazy. I think Kevin's schedule might be changing. So, next time I do something like that, I'll try my best to not give 1 day's notice and not get on mic the whole time. But anyway, either way, the people that were in the chat seemed to like it. The people there liked it. We were able to beat Krautbusters. No, not on 1/4. A few people asked that. But it was really enjoyable, and I hope to do more stuff like that. And I hope to free up more time to do a lot more events like that. But anyway, enough rambling. If anybody wants it, you can check out, or wants to look at those games, you can check out both the Brooklyn Video Games live streams. I promise I tried not to stand in front of the camera too often. And let's jump into the news. The Genesis game Panorama Cotton has just gotten an English translation, and I really didn't know too much about this game until Smoke Monster's post, but it looks like a story-based on-rails shooter, and it looks awesome. And this is probably just one of the many Genesis games I never got to because it wasn't in English. And I know I say this too often, so I'll just skip to the end and make it quick. I love language translations of games, even silly ones like Afterburner, where you don't really need to know what there's going on screen. It's still awesome. And it just makes the world a smaller place. I just hate the thought of some kid trying to play one of these older games and not being able to follow the story because it's not in their language. So by all means, anybody that has the ability and desire to translate a game into any language, go for it, because I guarantee you more people appreciate it than you would know, and certainly more people appreciate it than would tweet or talk in a podcast about it. So I promise the work isn't in vain. People are really digging it. MiSTeraddons.com has just added new 3D printed as well as acrylic MiSTer cases. And this gives me a great excuse to go through a quick rundown of what you need to get a MiSTer running. Smoke Monster's covered this amazingly since the beginning, but I still get a lot of people asking me I suggest that they buy. And you definitely need to start out with the main root of it, the DE10 Nano, as well as some kind of USB hub. There is one that's $6 on Amazon that I suggest that everybody buy, because even if you end up with a different one, it's $6. You're gonna use it at some point. For the money, you might as well. From there, you could just use that as is and access a bunch of cores, but at the very least, you should get an SD-RAM upgrade. And that's just one of the things available from MiSTeraddons.com, as well as a few other places, all linked on my site. That would allow for all of the cores to work. Then if you wanted analog outputs, you could buy the I/O board, which allows for a VGA output, so you could have a cable to get SCART, or you could use 480p from that, or whatever else. And there's even also another board you could add to the bottom that's a USB hub that integrates directly into it. Then there's also Wi-Fi modules that are cheap and small, that once you've loaded up all of the custom MiSTer software, then you could just do all basic updates over Wi-Fi, which is awesome and really easy. Every time there's a major update, you're going to have to erase the SD card and start from scratch, but it's not nearly as complicated as one would think. It really is just a matter of running the software, putting the stuff on it, and then going from there. So it's not as complicated, I think, as some of the Raspberry Pi images. And then, of course, it's my personal opinion that whenever you have a project like this, you got to have a case for it. I ended up using my MiSTer more with a case because I wasn't afraid to put it down on top of my RGB monitor. I wasn't afraid to move it around in places, and that might be a dumb thing to say, I know, but I just ended up using it more when I knew it was protected. So I'll link to my page on the website, which is a very basic jumping off point on links to the exact DE10 Nano kit that you need, and the exact cheap USB hub and wireless adapter that I found and tested myself. The wireless adapter is spotty. I think some people might be having issues with it, but mine I just plugged it in and it worked. So yet another reason that you might want to pick up one of those cheap $6 USB hubs, because the chain definitely worked for a lot of people. So, it's worth it even if you just only plug it in when you need to Wi-Fi update. But overall, I love the MiSTer project. I love how far it's going. And I'd like to see where it goes next. So hopefully we could continue having more talks about that, and maybe I could finally get a few people on for some kind of podcast or chat about it. Nintendo has just announced their Labo VR kits, and as with many of the announcements from Nintendo in the past few years, I'm still totally confused as to what exactly this is. And a lot of the other people that wrote about it, a lot of the larger blogs, said contradicting things as well, so I'm not the only one. What we know for sure is it's coming April 12th, that it will attach to the Switch itself, allowing you to use its very low-res screen in VR. I don't know how that's going to work. And then it's going to have different kits to turn it into things that actually look like a ton of fun for kids. Robots and animals and stuff like that. But the pricing is what's the confusing part. So people have said the base kit's $40, and then you could get everything for $80, but then there's many other kits. So I don't know. I think it just needs to be worded better, or maybe once they come out, we'll be able to figure all of this out. But it definitely looks like it was directed towards kids, which is cool. I just, when I saw it, I was just a little disappointed because I haven't had the best VR experience I've had is the Ghostbusters VR at Madame Tussauds in Times Square. It's expensive, but you basically wait in line and then you strap on a proton pack, which is your computer, and then VR goggles, which is essentially, you're pretending to put on the Ghostbusters I Can See Ghosts goggles, and you walk around. You basically walk between 2 or 3 rooms, but the way it's done in the game, you never look in the room. You're only looking through the goggles, and it's very cool. Even though the resolution isn't the greatest, you're pretending that you're looking through these ghost-seeing night vision goggles, so it doesn't matter. And I thought it was incredible. And I don't think you're ever going to be able to reproduce that at home, and nor would I expect Nintendo to do that with the Switch. But it's a stark contrast, their Labo kits, to what I hope is eventually what we experience as VR. So maybe it'll be good enough for kids to enjoy it. Doesn't look like something that most serious gamers would like. But what do I know? I've been wrong about that stuff before. And I would like to do a lot more on VR in the future. I'm not going to become a VR channel or anything like that. I do think it's relevant, and maybe I could tie some retro into it and use a Nintendo Virtual Boy emulator on it or something. But I don't know. There's one place in Manhattan that does full room VR stuff that I should be checking out maybe tomorrow even. So who knows? Maybe you'll be stuck with a post on that soon. But let me know your thoughts on Nintendo Labo VR. I guess for me it just seems like a very expensive kid's toy that may or may not be fun. And I really don't. From all of the announcements, doesn't get me excited, but I've been wrong before, so let me know what you think. And speaking of virtual reality, Benj Edwards has just put his Virtual Boy fight sticks on sale. The BX250 Virtual Man is now on sale for $250, and the Hyper Fighting Stick is now on sale for $220 until supplies run out. So I had to get one. Remember though, when you're paying for this, it's not just that you're getting a pretty much handmade stick, hand built by all that. You also have to have the power adapter integrated. You have to have the custom, custom controller port and all that stuff. So it's, it's expensive, but it's not like you're just getting a basic arcade controller. I do find it to be a little bit small, but if I hold it like this, my hands could get around the sides, and I haven't really been able to play too much Hyper Fighting yet because my Virtual Boy's getting repaired. But I did kind of mess around with some of the other games, and I like the stick for some of the games. Sometimes I prefer the D-pad. I guess it's exactly like any other console, right? Sometimes you'll probably just prefer the original controller it came with. Other times you really want more of an arcade stick feel, and it's pretty neat. So You know, to be honest, at over $200 for these things, it's not for everybody. But if you're a huge Virtual Boy fan, or if you're just obsessed with the VR version of hyper fighting, like I am, then this is pretty cool. It even comes with a switch on the back, the hyper fighting version at least, to switch between hyper fighting configurations. So then this plays just like Street Fighter, or a more basic 2-button Virtual Boy. There's also 2 in the front for start and select. So, you know. Honestly, I'm glad I bought mine. The Virtual Boy is one of those weird things where I'll probably only really sit down and play 4 or 5 games ever on it, and then mess with some of the homebrew. But I'm glad I have it. So to each his own. And if you love hyper fighting for Virtual Boy, consider it. Ben Venn really seems to be on a roll lately, because after he announced the Game Gear and Atari Lynx backlight replacement kits, he's now announcing the Neo Geo Pocket Color drop-in kit. So much like the others, I imagine it's going to be something that you don't need to cut any plastic, and that you put an aftermarket LCD display that could be fitted with a custom board that translates between signals. I'm kind of oversimplifying here. Overall, they're not the world's hardest mods. Certainly a lot easier than it would have been a few years ago, and a lot better than the Frontlight kits. No offense to anybody that makes them or has their own. I just don't prefer them. Just my preference. So it's great. Hopefully he'll get more details out soon. I'd want to know if these are all integer scaled, if there's going to be any weird artifacts or anything. I know the original, or the Game Boy Color backlight kits that he was doing seemed to be perfect. So hopefully I could do a follow-up interview with Ben, or maybe somebody else on the channel could as well. But it's pretty exciting, and it's certainly going to make me want to revisit handhelds again, because you know, I prefer playing on a bigger screen, and having these older, terrible-looking, non-backlit screens made it very hard for me to enjoy. And, I mean, at least nowadays, especially when the cheapest cell phone has a better screen. But now that we have these coming out, I think it's time to revisit them, and I think if any of these are your favorite consoles, you should definitely look into it. I was very excited that I finally got to review the Time Sleuth, the custom-made lag test device, display lag test device, designed by Dan and Christoph, the same team that did the Dreamcast HDMI. Dan sent me one of these a few weeks ago, and I had always planned on using this in an upcoming video that really talks about what lag is, and really would hopefully clarify it for everybody. But I've been seeing this thing sitting next to me, and I just had to do something. So I went old school, what the site originally started as, and just did a review right here in the page. So I guess I'll just quickly run through it all, and then very quickly run through it, and anybody that's interested could go through the full post. But I compared it to the Leo Bodnar testing device, which really, in all honesty, I didn't have many complaints about at all. It worked fine. It wasn't the best device out there. I thought the batteries died way too quick, and I guess I had trouble with the USB port. Maybe that was just me, though, fumbling around. But the Time Sleuth is powered only by USB, so I was able to power it right from the TV itself, and had one of those USB rechargeable battery packs, so that was pretty handy. It has a light in front, which I didn't think I would care so much about an LED status light until there were a few times using the Leo Bodnar that I had it up to a screen and nothing was happening, and I didn't know, are the batteries dead again? Did I forget to put it on the right input? Whereas this, you just know, all right, it's working and there's nothing on screen, so the problem's got to be something else. Next, it's got a dial where you could select 5 pre-programmed resolutions. And to get those programmed, you go to a website, you select which 5 out of a very long list. Let me scroll that over here for people watching. Out of this very long list of resolutions that ranges from 240p to 1080p. And then it spits out a firmware file, and then you use just a cheap $5 JTAG programmer. I think I actually have one right here. I haven't even taken out of the bag yet. So just one of these very cheap eBay programmers can go right on it, and that way you could configure it any way you'd like. I configured it with the resolutions that would apply most to what I do: 240p, 480i, 480p, 720p, and 1080p. But you could do any of the ones listed, and I went through and tested both my TCL TV and my LG OLED. And the one thing that I found pretty interesting was, well, the two things I found really interesting, I guess, was number one, the interlaced signals on both of those TVs were significantly more delayed. So I was getting things like 15 milliseconds of lag on all resolutions except 480i, but on 480i it was like 60 milliseconds of lag. And yes, I'm sure there was other settings. I'm sure I could go in there, and because some TVs have this trick where you need to be on that resolution in order to make any changes that apply to that resolution. So I probably could have tweaked a bit more, but not much, because I know I'd already done that on my other one. On my OLED TV, it was the same thing. The other thing that really interested me, though, on the LCD TV, as soon as I placed this up against the TV, instantly showed the lag, and it was always within, 0.1 millisecond. On the OLED TV, every time I changed resolution, when I held this up to the screen, the lag would start out at like 40 or 50 milliseconds, and it would take about 30 seconds to go down to around 30 milliseconds, around 2 frames, and then it would hover there until, I tried holding it for a couple of minutes. So it was pretty neat to me that whenever my OLED TV switched to a new resolution, it took a while for the lag to go down. So I'm wondering how that would apply in a game. I'm wondering if every time I open up a menu that's in a slightly different resolution and go back to the game, am I getting a significantly variable lag on it? So it's pretty interesting and something I'd like to look into further. It was a little bit out of the scope of this review. And the other thing I did notice is that on both TVs, every one of the progressive resolutions was slightly different as far as lag goes. It was never more than 1 millisecond difference. It was usually below that. But for years, there's been an argument of, will 720p or 480p be a difference in lag on a 1080p TV? And I always kind of thought yes. I guess it's true. It's just, at least on my TVs, would make 0 difference. So what I'd really like to do is go back and test some older model TVs. Cousin Scott's got my plasma. I know a couple people with TVs that I could bring this over and test. And I'd really like to see if that applies, because it seems like the newer TVs all have processing in it that's quick enough for game modes, I guess. But I'd really like to debunk that myth fully and see if there really were some TVs, especially I believe some Sony TVs like 10 years ago, where if you tried to use different resolutions, you'd get wildly different variations of lag. Or maybe that did happen, but it was just the same thing that I run into on the OLED, where you have to configure game mode in each individual resolution, not one global setting. Who knows, but I like to get to the bottom of these things just for the heck of it. But if you're interested in a lag testing device, or even just interested in the results, please check out the full review. The only, mistakes, if you want to call it that, my averages were all off, because you're supposed to go top, middle, bottom, but I was sitting there with a camera trying to take pictures of everything as I was doing it. So other than that, everything's pretty accurate. And I did update the page, the lag test results page that I had put on. So now there's an embedded spreadsheet that shows my results, and anybody could add to that if they want to. So now this will be a great way for at least us in the retro gaming community to be able to track what TVs we know are great. So I would suggest, if you have a TV that's either really great, really terrible, or one of the TVs that, like OLED TVs, they're not for everybody, especially not for your average PC user, but those are always kind of coveted, and people really want to see the lag on those. So definitely, if you have an OLED and you have one of these or can borrow one, let me know. And the only complaints that I saw on Twitter about this are people seemed to think that it was a device that they'd use once and never again. And I could assure you, after buying one of these, it'll come up in the weirdest times, especially if you if you throw this in your bag and you take this to your fellow nerd friends' houses. This will come out and test more displays than you could imagine. So if you genuinely think that's a concern, get some buddies to all chip in and pick one of these things up and share it between yourselves. Anybody that does any kind of events or really works with any kind of flat screens should own one of these. And overall, it's more cost-effective than the Leo Bodnar was anyway. So even though it's not a cheap device, it's around 80. I believe it's 80 for just the device, and then 95 with the 3D printed. Actually, with an ABS plastic case. Sorry about that. That was designed by Greg Collingall. So I love it. I'm very, very happy I got one of these things. I'm going to be using this constantly. If any of you, if I was over your house with this already, I'm doing it again just to verify our results. So definitely check it out if you're interested, and I'm super happy I got one. Here's one thing I never saw coming. A team of people have added a 3-player mode to the arcade version of Final Fight. Greco and Rotwang, I know I'm bad at pronouncing things, but it does actually say Rotwang. They have released a ROM hack of Final Fight Arcade, which will run on real CPS-1 hardware. So that means with the new Darksoft kit coming up, this is something that anybody with an original CPS-1 kit would be able to use, or people through emulation, because as much as people seem to misinterpret when I talk about emulation, I love it, and especially for things like arcade games. And if you've made yourself a really great Raspberry Pi kit, or taken the time to make a very fast and accurate PC emulator, this thing could be really enjoyable. So I'm really happy. I'm really looking forward to trying it out. Really happy people are doing things completely out of the box like this. And I think I'd really enjoy playing this one. So as soon as in fact, I think I'm going to like it so much that I'm going to wait till I get my CPS-1 kit to try it out, just to make it special, which is probably super cheesy and dumb. Whatever. I'm super cheesy and dumb sometimes. I'll take it. But this was very cool. Some pretty exciting news for Commodore 64 fans. There's now a component video mod for it. And that's something that's been asked for a long time. There's people that want anything other than S-Video. They want a true RGB or true component. And if done right, they'll be identical anyway. So it looks like the developer Copper Dragon has designed a kit that goes in place of the RF jack. And it's essentially a no-cut mod, because once you remove the RF jack, then you use a 3.5mm adapter to get the 3 YPBPR out of it. This will interface directly with the main video chip, and outputs 240p, 480p, and 480p with scan lines. This will work with NTSC and PAL Commodore 64s, and overall, it seems like the solution that people have been asking for a long time. And in fact, one of the most common questions I get is, what about the Commodore 64? You don't have any info of that on your site, which is one of the reasons why I'm super, super lucky to have other people jumping on board now. Vanessa knows quite a lot more about the Commodore 64 than I would ever pretend to, and it was awesome that she was able to write this up and get this in time for this podcast, because the goal is to keep everybody in the loop about everything going on in the retro gaming scene. But obviously, one human can't get to all of it. So everything about this makes me happy. Really appreciate the contribution from a writer that I wouldn't have had the same perspective. Really happy that now Commodore 64 fans have a really good, high-quality output. And, you know, always a fan of stuff that's a no-cut mod. So very cool. And, you know, if anybody around here has one, I'd love to try one out just to see what it looks like. But based on, you know, everything that I've read, it's supposed to be pretty freaking awesome. I have some updates on the DVI pass-through adapters designed to put your consoles directly into a DataPath Vision capture card. There's some possible other uses for this, but really that's the only thing that you should be thinking of for these. And I'll start from the top. The SCART to DVI will be made in a small production run from Insurrection Industries. Anybody that's interested, just go to their website, insurrectionindustries.com/SCART to DVI. Put yourself on the mailing list, and these should be ready for pre-order very soon. I asked last week how many people would be interested, and there was a good amount. So I think enough would be made for everybody that chimed in and said they wanted one, but not too many more. So if you're looking for one of these, definitely pick it up as soon as they go up for pre-order. And it should be 5 to 6 weeks delivery time from about today. So it won't be very long, all things considered. And this is the version that it's been tested on 240p and 480i, and I haven't found any issues with it. Hopefully, if anybody finds anything before it goes to production, we could still change it, but I'm lucky enough to have a lot of very smart friends that have looked at this, and no one's found anything majorly wrong for RGB SCART to DVI, exactly what this thing is designed for. Anybody getting this run of production can be confident it certainly works. There's nothing wrong with it, but we will eventually look to upgrade this with a different low-pass filter. And also Firebrand X was nice enough to go through and make a bunch of little changes for do-it-yourselfers. So the version you're getting from Insurrection is this exact one, which, it's been tested. We'll also test Firebrand X's upgrades, and there's no performance difference. This really is just going to be for people who solder their own, and it's just going to make it easier. And just as a note, unless you've soldered a 7374 chip before, I would recommend just buying one. It takes a lot longer than you would imagine because there's a lot of tiny little components, and that chip, and even for me personally, the USB port chip was a bit of a pain. Also, Greg Collins is in the midst of making a 3D adapter for it. It seems like he's almost done. I don't want to show a picture of the prototype yet because I love his work and I want to show the final design, and I love the way he went about this. So very cool for these. And so basically completed for the time being, I guess you would say. I'll have an update when the 3D print design's available, but whatever you see now is pretty much what you're going to get for the near future. Next is the component to DVI adapter. Alrithmador, I think I got the screen name right, has made a plexi case for it, which looks great. It fits perfect too. The boards themselves aren't quite ready for prime time, if you will. Both because I really think that if you're going to do a component video board, you need to have a filter that could at least do 480p as well as 240p and 480i. So anybody that wants these now, I have a few extra boards, and I think some assembled. The design files, of course, are up on the website for anybody that would like to build their own. But at the moment, I would consider this one a temporary solution. And also, I believe some of the inputs aren't configured perfectly, so you might get a slight color difference. So this is really, like, for streamers, if you just needed a component video with a filter in it, like, this would be a fine thing to pick up. And there's a few people that I've sent these out to already because I want their feedback. And in fact, having something that's not perfect is probably great so we could really dig in and test it. But for the short term, this is going to be delayed a little longer. I want to get at least a filter in there that can handle up to 480p, but hopefully farther. And once again, thank you to everybody who contacted me via message, in the comments. There was so many great people with great info on this one, and I really appreciated that. So we're going to try to implement all of it. And I'm not sure how far along this will be, but I'll definitely have updates on that in the future. And then lastly, I will, as soon as that's done and as soon as we have the low pass filter confirmed working, we'll probably do a run of that. Then I'll go over to the VGA to DVI adapters. And hopefully by that time we'll get a few more people on board working on this open source project, so it'll go a little bit easier. I'm pretty much useless with design. I have the theory down and I have the knowledge of what I need. I just don't know how to do it. So thank you to everybody contributing. But the final one will be the VGA to DVI, and that one will do two things. It'll, of course, implement the same filter, so that'll, at the very least, go 240p to 480p, hopefully higher. And also, it will have a sync stripper pass-through option, just like the SCART version. So pass-through means all signals just get sent as they would have normally, which is probably what people should use for any VGA input. And then the sync stripper would be turned on for people who need RGBS through VGA. And I think the most common scenario for that would be Extron Crosspoint users or people that put their consoles directly into their RGB monitors and then use the BNC outs to one of those VGA to BNC cables. So that'll work for them. Once that's done, then we'll circle back and apply everything that we found to the original SCART to DVI. I can't imagine that'll be before the end of the summer, probably before the end of the year. So really the only, I don't even know if you'd call it bad news, but the only thing about the SCART to DVI is that if you were looking to do 480p via SCART right now, that's kind of put on the back burner because I want individual adapters for each use case tailored for exactly that. I looked into doing a bunch of different inputs to output DVI, and there was a few things about it that really made me strongly feel that these were a better solution. Not just the fit, but the cost. You might be getting stuff that you might be paying a lot of extra money for something you don't need. the least path that an analog signal could travel. I could go on forever, so I'll stop rambling about this stuff. I just wanted to give everybody a full update on where the project is. And once again, it's open source. So if you're listening to me saying, all of this is dumb, I want it my own way, go for it. That's exactly why I open sourced it. My hope is, though, for the short term, at least till the devices are finalized in my eyes, that we retain this as a team effort. I'll keep the main updates right on my pages on RetroRGB. And then once everything is at a point where it's everything a data path capture user could ask for, then by all means go off and make some crazy edition of this and do whatever you would like. So, just my hopes. Once again, it's open source. Just do whatever you'd like. And lastly, one last time, if you are interested in the SCART to DVI data path pass-through adapter, sign up for the mailing list on Insurrection Industries. And if you hadn't caught up with all the podcasts in the past few weeks, check out last week's podcast, as well as the video capture video and video capture section of the website to figure out what the heck I've been talking about with these things. Jenovi's Retro Impressions just posted a very cool video that compared the different console versions of Mortal Kombat 2. And I really enjoyed it. I already, I'm a huge Mortal Kombat fan, so, I kind of knew what I was getting into before I watched it, but I do like the way everything was presented. The only thing I have to add to it, I don't know if you'd call it criticism or maybe just my own thoughts on it. There were 2 points. Jenovi, in his Super Nintendo comparisons, used the Launch Edition SNES, so one of the 2-chip, 3 chips, whatever you feel like calling it. And those are notoriously blurry. Now, his impression of this wasn't wrong, and the examples he showed wasn't wrong, because the majority of Super Nintendo consoles look like this. So it's still accurate, it's just not as good as it could be from original consoles. So I just put up a quick comparison on the page. This is that same generic link picture, which, by the way, now that the video capture methods I have are much better, I should redo those, because the blurry one's going to look even blurrier, and the sharper one's going to look even sharper. I digress. And then here's a screenshot from him, from his video next to something I just snapped really quickly. So you could see that there's definitely a sharpness difference. But once again, I don't necessarily disagree with his video. I just, for the majority of the people that played that game back in the day, it'd probably be blurry. But nowadays, we know that, you could get better methods. However, I still agree 100% with his assessment of which one is his favorite, because of one thing he did forget to mention, and that's input lag. So this is not display lag, this is not emulation lag, this is just simply the time it takes from the time you press the button on the controller until the time the character moves on screen. And I always kind of suspected that the SNES version was a little laggy, but Smoke Monster a while back was testing the RetroArch no lag mode, and he was able to demonstrate that on original games, the Genesis version of MK2 was, as you would expect, but there was a lot more input lag for the Super Nintendo version. Now, unlike display lag, that shouldn't be variable, or more so than any other game would. So that means that if the only version of MK2 you've ever played was the SNES version, and you like the controller, then you would never have a complaint about it. But if you've played the arcade version, the Genesis version, and now especially with people with full retro gaming setups that have all the consoles, you're definitely going to notice a difference. And I would, in my opinion, always prefer the Genesis or 32X editions over that one just for that reason. So at the end of the day, I agree with his full assessment of everything. Hopefully I didn't give away too much of the video, and I would still recommend watching it because I thought it was a very enjoyable video. I guess just keep both of those things in mind when you do, and pay attention as you're watching to the SNES captures, because it is kind of funny for those of us who have done RGB mods on their one-chip or mini SNES consoles now it's been years since that mod had become popular, and since I started the site, I guess it was already popular before that. So for those of us who have been using the really sharp version for this long, check out what the 2-chip version looks like, and it's kind of neat to see what a massive difference from Nintendo's own console. But as you could tell, I liked the video a lot, so sorry if I rambled too long on it. The final part of the What Happened to Paprium documentary was just released, and this whole story is just such a weird and interesting thing. I think anybody who's even remotely interested should check out the documentary. I thought it was pretty cool, and I definitely feel bad for all the people that that lost their money and never get a game or the controller. And some of those were really expensive, so it's not a trivial amount of money. But so I certainly don't want to say check out the fun drama video when it involves people who lost money, but it is kind of interesting to see a weird perspective on what happened. So I haven't watched part 3 yet, but I'm looking forward to checking it out. Mobius Striptech has just released a PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16 internal audio amplifier. This is designed for the original consoles, which didn't output stereo audio. And I think with a lot of the mods, people just tap left and right stereo audio directly to something like a mini DIN. And it works, but the audio levels are kind of low, and it's not the best quality. So installing one of these internally would take care of that, and you get good quality sound. I'm actually pretty interested to see how something like this would compare to the audio upgrades on the SSD S3. Because depending on your situation, as I went into great detail with in that video, some people might prefer using the SSD S3, and others might just prefer internal mods to their consoles and use other methods. So maybe someday somebody could do a side-by-side comparison of that. For now, if you're interested in any of the other options available, check out the TurboGrafx 16 video that I posted a while back. And if you have internal mods to your consoles, definitely consider the audio amp, because it certainly would give a good upgrade to your audio to match the upgrade of your video if you've done the RGB mod as well. There's now a new menu available for the RetroHQ Atari Lynx ROM cart. An Atari Age user has just released the new menu loader, and it's a drop-in replacement for the version 1.8 or version 1.9 menu with a bunch of new features. So very cool that these things are still getting updates. I loved my Lynx SD cart, zero complaints whatsoever. I thought it worked really great. So, I guess just one more reason to pick it up if you're a fan of the Atari Lynx. Well, that's it for this week. Before I go, just another quick shout out to Wes from Second Opinion Games for making these very awesome SCART RetroRGB shirts. I'll leave the link for anybody that wants one, but I certainly enjoy wearing these things. And also, as always, thank you to all of my supporters. None of these videos would happen without you, and I really appreciate it wherever it comes from. I don't really care whether it's the join on YouTube, Bitbacker, Subscribestar, Patreon. You're all awesome, and you're all the reason this could still happen. So thank you very much. I'm interested to seeing what everybody has to say in the comments, and I'll see you all next week.